The paper was still in her jacket pocket when she walked into the rehearsal. She had not thrown it away. This was the detail that would stay with her, not the writing of it, not the Bürostürme of it in her fist in the café on Haight Street on a January morning in 1966, but the fact that she had put it in her pocket instead of leaving it on the table or dropping it in the wire bin by the door. She had carried it with her. She had carried it the 6 blocks from the café to the address she had been given, up the stairs to the third-floor room where the band was setting up, and she had been aware of it in her pocket the whole time. The small, compressed weight of a Bürostürme piece of paper containing 4 words she had written on one side and a list she had written on the other. The 4 words written at the top of the page before the list were, "What else could I be?" The list, written below them in the large, slightly pressured handwriting she had had since high school, contained the following: teacher, painter, bookstore, secretary, librarian, something with animals. She had stared at the list for a long time in the café. She had ordered a second coffee she didn't need because she had been there long enough that ordering something else felt obligatory, and she had looked at the list and tried to picture herself inside each of the words on it. Teacher, she had tried to imagine the classroom, the organized rows, the lesson plan, the requirement to reduce what she knew into portions that fit the available time. She could picture being interested in the subject. She had always read widely and thought carefully, and had opinions about ideas that she would have been happy to discuss indefinitely. She could not picture the reduction. She could not picture making herself the size the classroom required. Painter, she had painted as a teenager in Port Arthur, with a genuine and private pleasure that had nothing to do with performance or audience. She had covered her bedroom walls with images that her mother had looked at with an expression somewhere between pride and alarm. She could picture the pleasure of it. She could not picture it as a life, as the organizing principle of a day, as the thing that got her out of bed and kept her going and made the rest of the hours around it make sense. Bookstore, this one she had lingered on the longest, the quiet, the shelves, the transactions that were small and meaningful, handing someone a book that might change something in them, receiving the books that arrived in boxes from publishers, the system of it. The order, she had worked briefly in a bookstore in Austin during the month she was trying to stop, and she had liked it more than she had admitted to anyone. She had liked the mornings before it opened, when the store was hers alone and the light came through the front window at a low angle and the books were simply books, not signs of anything, not symbols of a life she wasn't living. She had written secretary and librarian as gestures toward the category of sensible and administrative, knowing as she wrote them that they were placeholders rather than possibilities. Something with animals was honest but vague. She had included it because she genuinely liked animals, because they did not require the performance of a self, because a dog did not care whether you were Janis Joplin or anyone else. She had looked at the list for a long time, then she had Bürostürme it in her fist, not with violence. The gesture was more deliberate than that, more considered. She was not throwing something away in frustration. She was completing an exercise. She had needed to look at the alternatives, had needed to hold them in her hands and examine them, and she had done that, and the examination had produced its result. She put the paper in her jacket pocket. She left the café. She walked 6 blocks to the address she had been given. She had been in San Francisco for 10 days. The first time she had left, in 1963, it had been with a combination of hope and terror that she had not been able to sustain past the first year. The city had seemed to offer everything she needed: the context, the community, the permission to be large in ways that Port Arthur had never granted, and it had offered some of it. But she had arrived too early, before she understood what she was looking for or how to find it, and the gap between what the city promised and what she had been able to extract from it had worn her down in a way she was still measuring 3 years later. She had gone back to Texas in 1965. She had tried, with genuine effort and genuine exhaustion, to construct the kind of life that her mother Dorothy's worry had always pointed toward, the manageable life, the life with a shape that fit the available space. She had taken classes at the university. She had had a boyfriend who asked few questions and worked in a hardware store and represented, in his orderliness and his contentment with ordinary things, the kind of life she was attempting to inhabit. She had used the record player only in the evenings. She had been, by every surface measurement, managing. The surface measurements were missing something. She had gotten close enough to feel what the manageable life would have been like. and she had understood, sitting in a bar on a Thursday night in Austin listening to someone else sing a song she knew better than he did, that the life was not available to her. The ground kept moving. The music would not agree to stay inside, so she had come back, January 1966. The same city, the same cold fog, the same sense of something being built in the streets and the rehearsal rooms, and the conversations in bars that she had felt the first time and that had not diminished in the 3 years she had been away. The Haight-Ashbury neighborhood was in the middle of becoming something. She could feel it in the energy of the block, in the way people moved and spoke and gathered, in the particular quality of a community that has decided it is making something new and has not yet discovered what the making will cost. A mutual friend had mentioned a band called Big Brother and the Holding Company. They were looking for a singer. The mutual friend thought the fit might be interesting, said it in the offhand way of someone who suspects they are understating the case but doesn't want to oversell it. She had been given the address of their rehearsal space. Before going, she had stopped in the café on Haight Street and ordered coffee, and taken a piece of paper from her bag and written 4 words at the top of it and a list below them. The rehearsal space was on the 3rd floor of a building that also contained, on the ground floor, a leather goods shop, and on the 2nd floor, an operation of unclear purpose that produced intermittent sounds of machinery. The stairs were steep and slightly uneven and smelled of the particular combination of wood and old paint and something organic that characterized San Francisco buildings of that era. She could hear them before she reached the top of the stairs. Not music, they were not playing yet. She could hear the sounds of instruments being moved, the knock of a guitar against a stand, a brief drum fill that was someone testing rather than performing, voices in conversation. The sounds of people getting ready, which are different from the sounds of people playing and carry their own information about the kind of playing that is coming. She stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, her hand on the doorframe. The paper was in her pocket. The list was in the paper. Teacher, painter, bookstore, secretary, librarian, something with animals, all Bureshcher mushed together in the 4-word question that preceded them. She went in. Peter Albin was the first one she spoke to, the bassist, a compact and direct man who introduced himself without ceremony and asked if she wanted water and pointed out where the microphone was. Dave Getz was behind the drum kit, adjusting something on the hi-hat with the focused attention of a percussionist calibrating an instrument. Sam Andrew and James Gurley were at their guitars, running through fragments of things not together, each in their own orbit, the rehearsal room having the particular quality of a space where people are individually preparing to collectively begin. She stood near the microphone and looked at the room, and the room looked back at her. This was the moment she would think about later when people asked her about the beginning, not the first note, not the reaction of the musicians when they heard her, but this moment standing near the microphone, the paper in her jacket pocket, the alternatives Bureshcher inside it, looking at a room full of people she did not know and feeling, for the first time in 3 years, that the ground under her feet was solid. Not certain, not promised, simply not moving for a moment. She said, "Should we try something?" Dave Getz looked up from the hi-hat. Peter Albin nodded. Sam Andrew played a chord that was both an answer and a question. James Gurley moved to his position in the way of someone who has been waiting for the occasion to arrive and is ready now that it has. She took the microphone, and then she sang. What happened in that room when she sang has been described by Peter Albin and Dave Getz and Sam Andrew in separate interviews, at separate times, with the kind of consistency that suggests they are describing something they actually experienced rather than something they have retroactively constructed from the knowledge of what came after. They said the room changed, not metaphorically. Physically, the air pressure, the quality of the sound, something that could be felt in the chest before it could be named with language. She had been singing for years in small rooms, for small audiences, in the grinding accumulation of a career that had not yet found its context. She had been good in all of those rooms, better than the rooms deserved, better than the circumstances rewarded. But she had been good without the sound she was making having somewhere to go, without an architecture around it that could hold it and respond to it and give it something to push against. Big Brother gave the sound somewhere to go, the looseness of their playing, the particular freedom of musicians who had taught themselves rather than been trained, who played by feel rather than by instruction, who followed the energy of a thing rather than the notation of it. That looseness was exactly the right container for what she was making. She could push against it and it moved. She could pull back and it waited. She could go somewhere unexpected, and the band, rather than holding the expected position, went with her. The first song ended. The room was quiet for a moment. Dave Getz said something, Sam Andrew said something. She did not remember afterward exactly what they said because she had not been listening to the words, she had been listening to the quality of the silence, which was the silence of people who have just heard something and do not yet have a framework for it, and are constructing the framework in real time. Peter Albin said, "Let's do another one." They did another one, and another. They played for 3 hours without stopping to discuss what was happening, because stopping to discuss it would have interrupted the happening, and none of them wanted to interrupt it. At some point during the third hour, she became aware of the paper in her jacket pocket. Not consciously, it surfaced at the edge of awareness, the way objects in your pocket surface when you are doing something that requires the full attention of the rest of you. A small, compressed weight. Teacher, painter, bookstore, secretary, librarian, something with animals. She did not take it out. She kept singing. The paper stayed in her pocket through the rest of the rehearsal and through the conversation afterward when Peter Albin said she should come back on Thursday, and through the walk home in the January fog, the fog having come in completely by the time she left the building, San Francisco doing what it did in the evenings, becoming smaller and more intimate. The large distances collapsed into the immediate block and the immediate corner and the quality of light through a wet window. She walked through the Haight in the fog. The neighborhood was alive even at this hour, voices from open doorways, the smell of food from somewhere, a guitar audible from an upper window, not performing but practicing, the sound of someone working on something private. She was part of it and not part of it. She was too new to the neighborhood to belong to it yet. She was something prior to belonging. She was arriving. She bought a sandwich at a counter on the corner and took it to the apartment that was not yet hers, borrowed from someone who was somewhere else for the month, a small place on the second floor with a view of a fire escape and a sliver of the street below. She sat on the floor with her back against the borrowed sofa and ate the sandwich and held the paper in her other hand without opening it. She thought about the café and the list. She thought about the bar in Austin and the song she had known since 17. She thought about the room on the third floor and the moment the sound found somewhere to go, the moment Peter Albin adjusted his stance at the bass and Dave Getz's hi-hat settled into the groove and something clicked into place, the audible equivalent of a key finding a lock, and she had felt the ground become solid under her feet in a way it had not been solid since she could remember. She thought about the word Thursday, which Peter Albin had said in the offhand tone of someone for whom Thursday was simply a day of the week and not a destination, and how in his mouth it had sounded ordinary and in her chest it had landed as something close to a door opening. She opened the paper. She thought about the café. She thought about the way she had held each word on the list, teacher, painter, bookstore, and tried to find herself inside it and found only the absence of herself, the shape of a life that would not be inhabited by the person she actually was. She thought about the bar in Austin and the song she had known since 17, and the man who had sung it correctly and incompletely, and the understanding that had arrived in the listening. She was the only person she knew who could close the distance between what it was and what it could be. She thought about the room on the third floor and the moment the sound found somewhere to go. She opened the paper. She looked at the list for a long time, the words she had written that morning in the café, the alternatives she had examined and found uninhabitable, the evidence of the exercise she had needed to complete before she could walk up the stairs and take the microphone. The paper had been in her pocket for 6 hours. It was slightly warm from the pocket, slightly softened at the folds from being bureaucratic and then carried. The handwriting was still clear: teacher, painter, bookstore, secretary, librarian, something with animals. And above them the 4 words that had preceded the list. What else could I be? She thought, I know the answer now. Not because the rehearsal had been a revelation in the dramatic sense, though it had been extraordinary, though the 3 hours had been the most completely herself she had felt in years. Because the list and the rehearsal had worked together the way an experiment and its result worked together. She had needed the list to know that none of the words on it were true. She had needed to walk into the rehearsal room carrying the bureaucratic evidence of the false answers before the right answer could arrive with its full weight. The right answer had arrived when Peter Albin adjusted his stance at the bass and the room changed and she felt the ground stop moving. The right answer was this. This is what else I could be. This is the only thing I could ever have been. She tore the paper into small pieces, not in frustration, not in celebration, in the quiet, practical way of someone who has finished with something and is clearing the space it occupied. The pieces were small enough that the words were no longer legible, no longer teacher and painter and bookstore, but simply paper, white and ordinary and no longer carrying anything. She dropped the pieces in the bin by the door. She sat back down on the floor against the borrowed sofa. Outside, the San Francisco fog pressed against the window, the city doing what it did, metabolizing the night, continuing its ongoing construction of itself, indifferent to the small apartment on the second floor where a 22-year-old woman had just disposed of a list of lives she was not going to live. The rehearsal was on Thursday. She would be there. And everything else, Monterey, the recordings, the voice that would reach people in rooms she would never see, the transmission that would run from her outward into the world and find its way to teenagers in bedrooms across the bay and journalists in Louisville and people she would never meet who would feel. In the listening, something they had not been able to feel anywhere else. All of it began in a café on Haight Street on a January morning, with a piece of paper and a list and the decision to put it in her pocket instead of throwing it away. She had needed to know what she wasn't. Now she knew what she was. Thursday could not come soon enough.